Hey folks, welcome back to the show. Today's episode is with a guy that I've known for a while. He's a friend and he is one of the team members behind Troscriptions, which is an incredible supplement line that we've normally heard Dr. Scott Scher speak to. And this time we brought someone new in to give you a different perspective on some of the amazing things that they're doing over there. But before we launch into the episode, of course, I have a few people to thank. And the first people I want to thank is you, the listener. So whether you're here for the first time or whether you're a repeat listener, I'd like to welcome you back to the show or welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for being here and invite you to leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to the episode on, assuming, of course, that you enjoy it. And also, if you get value from this episode, please make sure to share it with your friends, your family, your network, anybody else that you think would also get value from it. And last but not least, if you want to know about anything else, any of the other things that I'm doing, just head on over to natnidham.com. And that's where you can sign up for the newsletter, learn about the BSP community, which is my private membership group. And also check out Nat Recommends, which is where I list all of the different products that I've talked about over the last number of years that I recommend to people. And you'll get some information about those products and links and codes and links to podcasts also, if you happen to miss that episode. Let's talk about this episode. Once again, like I said, we're talking about sleep. And too often we put it on the back burner because we're so tied to being busy and productive. But what I want you to know is that it is crucial for longevity and immunity. And this is what I dive into in this episode of the Longevity Podcast with my special guest, Boomer Anderson from Smarter Not Harder, which is the company behind Troscriptions. We discuss the need for transparency from supplement companies and how Troscriptions focuses on bringing new and effective ingredients to market to support longevity. We also dive into the science behind sleep, the benefits of the ingredients in their unique sleep formula, and why sleep is so freaking important for immunity and overall health. Now, Boomer Anderson is the CEO of Smarter Not Harder, makers of Troscriptions. He's also the CEO of Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, which is Home Hope, a nonprofit focused on educating doctors and practitioners on how to optimize for health rather than treat disease. Now, if you want to get your hands on any of the Troscriptions troches, all you have to do is go to troscriptions.com and make sure to use NAT10 to save when you're shopping. Now, let's jump into the episode. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Boomer Anderson, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you here at long last.
I know, Nat. It's been, we see each other at all these conferences all the time, and I always enjoy our conversations. So thank you for having me. And it's a beautiful sunny day where you are and where I am. So I'm sure we're going to have a fun conversation here.
Yeah, where are you actually? We didn't even talk about that because you're wearing a jacket. I'm sitting here in a linen shirt sweating.
Yeah, that's just the beauty of air conditioning. But I'm in Chicago. So,
okay.
Chicago summers are interesting in the sense, and I could do Celsius for those who want, but sometimes days are high 30s or 90s, even 100, and then the next day it's like 60, low 20s. And
we're carbon copy over here.
Yeah.
This weekend I think we went from 60s to 80s, and now we're into the 90s, and it's all over the map.
It's I assume today is probably a little bit warmer, but since I'm inside enjoying this lovely air conditioning, I'd figure I'd wear a long sleeve shirt and talk to my friend Nat.
Cozy up. Amazing. So we are gathered here today. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. We're going to cover a lot of ground, but I think before we get into the nut of it, we're going to be talking about sleep. We're going to talk about immunity, always within this container of health today with a view to longevity down the road. One of the things I'm excited about this conversation about is your perspective in the supplement space, because you have a unique background. You bring a different toolkit to this space. And although you're you're a principal with Troscriptions. You have a very, very interesting background in the supplement space. I think you said you set up Full Script in the UK, right?
Well, it's they may not see themselves that way, but it's a company called WellDM.
Oh,
And
sorry.
so when a number of years ago, I was involved with the venture capitalists at the time. This background actually comes from the fact that I am a health optimization practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
And Nat, I think you know this living in Canada, but sometimes the supplements that you can get in the United States, you can't necessarily get in
Oh yeah.
Canada. I've dealt with Health Canada quite a lot,
Oh my God.
but
Yeah. Nightmare.
the same is true for the EU,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this was even before Brexit officially happened, and I was flying back and forth with a bag full of supplements and trying to figure out how to get these brands into the EU. And so I was having a conversation with somebody who may be well known in the biohacking space named Mads Fries, and he was working with a venture firm at
Yeah.
the time. And Mads and I were tossing around ideas after one of these summits in Finland. And we came up, well, we were talking about creating essentially a supplement dispensary in Europe for practitioners. And I was involved in that really at the beginning. But due to my commitments here at Troscriptions, Smarter Not Harder, the parent company, I was spread a little bit too thin. And of course, a good team took over. And as a result, I do have a very unique and in-depth perspective on the supplement industry and perhaps the questions that people should be asking.
Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting place to start, right? I mean, here you are representing a supplement company, but at the end of the day, there's a new supplement company popping up every 10 minutes. And some of them
Of
are
course.
really well thought out. Their hearts are in the right place. They put their money in the research. They do the work. But, it's hard to imagine that, when you're looking, when even the listeners of this podcast, when they're faced with 7 different choices for very similar ingredients, where do they begin? Like, how do they begin to think about, is this company more worthy than that company? I mean, to some degree, they rely on people like me who are in this space to do the work, and we do the best that we can, but you don't always want to do that. Sometimes you want to be able to do your own work. And so, maybe you can help people understand, like, what are some of the questions or what are some of the signs they should be looking for that you're dealing with someone who's doing what they need to do versus people who are seeing opportunity and say, hey, we can make some money here.
Of course. And there's, let me just say this, that the frustration that everybody is going through when it comes to supplements was one of the reasons why I got involved in this space altogether.
Mm-hmm.
It was, this was back when I was living in Singapore even. I was listening to all of these podcasts by very, very prominent influencers, and they're very convincing that you take high dose selenium every day and you're going to feel like God. And by the way, that may not be the case for most
It can
people.
actually kind of kill
And
you, can it? Give
well,
you radiation
yeah,
or
it
something.
leads to selenium toxicity,
Yeah,
which is a minor detail.
yeah.
But of course, at that time I was going out and trying everything because I was looking for that feeling, that edge.
Mm-hmm.
And I became very disappointed. But when you start looking at the regulations, whether it's in the US, the UK, etc., the dietary supplement industry is very lightly regulated. And therefore, there's not very much when it comes to information that the companies need to provide. And this whole frustration led me to getting involved with WellDM. It also led a particular direction that we're taking with Troscriptions, which I'll get into in here in a second. So for anybody listening out there who's frustrated, yes, I've been there. I still am there. And because there are supplements that I need as an individual that are outside of the Troscriptions product line. And occasionally you're kind of looking at these new things that come online and you're like, okay, does that actually work? So what are the kind of questions that you can ask? I think there's a few that I wish more people would demand a lot of their supplement companies. Because if you think about it, you're making an investment in something that's going into your body. And therefore, you want to make sure that what is going into your body is not doing any harm at first.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you do that? Well, if the supplement company is worth its weight you're going to email their customer service and you're going to ask for a couple of things. And, different supplement companies have different ways of doing this, but you can ask for things like certificates of analysis on the ingredients that go into their supplements. You certainly and you should read the back label of the supplement for particular fillers that may or may not be agitating to you. You can also ask the supplement company for something called an HPLC test. Now, certain supplement companies might also have NMR, but HPLC test is a way to almost guarantee, or at least get as close as possible to guaranteeing that what you see on the label is actually within the capsule or whatever dosage form that you're taking. And when you're emailing that company, there's going to be times where they say like, hey, we don't do this. And that's okay. I would advise you to go to a different company at that point, because if they are unwilling to test their own products for purity, for potency, for heavy metals, for microbes, and a few other things, why should you be putting it in your body?
And for consistency. I mean, you said something a minute ago. Like I met a supplement company earlier this spring, and this guy's dealing with a supplement that comes from food. He because he knows that his supplement is the active ingredient in his supplement is dependent on how these animals feed. He tests every batch and will actually change the dosage on the bottle batch to batch, depending on what his tests have shown, which I found astounding. That someone would go to that expense and that trouble. And yet it kind of makes me say, wow, like you are super committed.
Yeah. And that person is doing exactly what we're setting out to do at Troscriptions, right? So Troscriptions, the idea is to create something in between a pharmaceutical company and a supplement company. One of the reasons why we're doing that is because the dietary supplement industry is too lightly regulated. As a result, you're getting a lot of people that are with good intentions trying to do something for their health. And in best case, it does nothing for them. And in worst case, it might actually put them in a worse off spot. And then we want to do it with the analytical rigor of a pharmaceutical company. But because people need help now, we're not going to do clinical trials, at least not yet. And so that's the idea behind Troscriptions, at least in terms of the quality of the product. You know the team very well, Nat, but we have 5 doctors on the team. I myself am a health optimization practitioner. Everyone needs to know exactly what's in our troches or what's in the bottle of supplement that they're taking is what their client needs. So going back to the questions that you can ask for those certificates of analysis. You can ask for HPLC testing or NMR testing if they don't have HPLC. You can ask for heavy metals testing. You can ask for micro testing. And the company should be able to provide it to you, or at least tell you why they don't. There may be companies that have been around for a long time that have established processes, in which case then there is an element of trust that you put in those companies. However, if this sounds like a lot of work for anybody, and this is, by the way, like I've spent hours upon hours emailing back and forth with companies, getting on phones with them, etc. Get a really good practitioner, because the practitioner will do a lot of the legwork for you so that you can really take the supplement and know what's in there is exactly what you need.
Yeah.
A couple of other things I want to add there. If you're doing the diligence on the label on the bottle, one of the things that I see is very common, particularly around a lot of supplements that are pitched in this world that you and I are in, Nat, is clinically effective doses. And this, again, requires another element of research on the consumer's part, is what is the clinical effective dose for the ingredient that you're looking for? So let's take, for example, you can look at something like curcumin. Well, curcumin is actually a bioavailability discussion too. And so how do you ensure that you're getting a bioavailable form of curcumin, a strong one? There is a patented compound there called Mariva that you can look into as well.
Yeah.
But you have to look at the research to understand, is the dose even enough for me, for the problem that I'm trying to solve? And probably my last point here, and this kind of dovetails with that practitioner, one of the best ways to filter the supplement world is to have lab tests. And if you have lab tests and you're able to analyze, let's say, your Krebs cycle and know what steps of the Krebs cycle are you're insufficient in, or let's say you have heavy metal toxicities and you can know how to address them, it provides a filter. Yeah, it's an expensive filter, but at the same time, if you're going to invest in a supplement that's costing you $50 to $100 a month, that additional $500 to $1,000 may not be so expensive over the long run for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, knowing that it's what you need when you need it, and then knowing knowing that you're taking the right dose is going to make all the difference in the world. And I'm also a big fan. And I again, like finding someone you trust, a practitioner or whoever it may be, to help to have done some of that legwork for you is going to be a big help. Okay, so Matt, you're going to have to edit this out. I completely lost my train of thought.
I can just, let me pick up on that, Nat, because that was a good point. Because having the practitioner in many ways, and I'll try to make an analogy to American football here, but I'll try and bring it back for everybody. So in American football, there is something called the left tackle. And most quarterbacks in the NFL are right-handed. And so the left tackle is the person who protects your blind side. So you can picture somebody on the defense coming around and they're really just trying to tackle you, right? And you can think of the defense in this case as either being some talented marketer or your own immune system fighting you in certain cases. And so you need that left tackle. And that left tackle oftentimes is that practitioner. Finding a good practitioner is very important because they'll do a lot of the legwork that we're talking about here for you. Managing your health can be a full-time job or more than a full-time job. And trust me, when I've tried to do it myself alone, it has been. But having somebody in your sort of advisory panel that manages your health is fantastic.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, we'll talk, there's an arm of the business that you're involved in that actually trains practitioners. And it's one of those programs I've always flirted with, but haven't been practicing much lately. So I'm like, okay, I'm putting it on the shelf maybe for a little while from now. Okay, so let's move into the Troscription space, because, it's a very, I mean, there's many things that I love about the company, but including all the people involved in it, because you guys are everybody's so brilliant, brings so much of their own brilliance to the puzzle. And it's like 5 practitioners or doctors who bring their wisdom to a space that sorely needs it. Right. And I would say that, when it comes to regulations, being in a country where things are overregulated, I'm a big fan of self-regulation for companies and just not calling on the powers that be to do the work for us, because the filters that they apply very often are not going to be in our best interest. But when we move into the space of Troscriptions, what I love about you guys is there's no product here that's like a Me Too product. You're not going to find these types of formulas anywhere else. And that, I think, might have a lot to do with Dr. Ashikuso and his approach, which is to research and find these novel ingredients and then bring alchemy into it and say, okay, well, if I take a tiny bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that, what happens? And you very often end up with like a sum that is much greater than the parts. Right? If you took any one of those little pieces on their own, they probably wouldn't do that much. But there's something about the synergy and the multiplication effect of how these things are put together that really delivers. And so I wanted to start with, because the podcast is about longevity and we talk about longevity, and because of the space, the stable of formulas that you have under you right now, if I had to pick one, I mean, it would be a toss-up between sleep and immunity, but I'm going to pick sleep as the first place to go, because number one, so many people still struggle with their sleep, and we can't have a good immune system if we're not sleeping, right? So whereas well, I mean, if you don't have a good immune system, you could probably still sleep. You wouldn't sleep well, but I mean, I could turn myself into a knot here, but I'm going to start with sleep because that's where I'm going to plant my flag. So
Beautiful.
I do want to talk about the sleep formula a little bit because it does have some very interesting different approaches to delivery of certain compounds and compounds that are not the same as you would find elsewhere that I would love us to kind of dig into. And there's a ligand in there. There's even the form of GABA that you use, which is not a traditional GABA, and why you pick that. So fire away.
Okay, so it's funny that you mentioned novel ingredients to start, Nat, because let me tell you a little story. I was on stage speaking at a conference in front of practitioners in San Antonio, and I mentioned that Troscriptions will never produce a vitamin C.
Mm.
And what I meant in that is that there are plenty of people producing vitamin C. And so you can go out and buy their vitamin C. No, like, you're not going to offend us. We are going to focus on bringing new ingredients to market, the most effective ingredients to market. But I had a practitioner come up to me afterwards and actually took offense to this. They're like, "How could you not do vitamin C?" Because
What?
they're a very strong advocate of a lot of the things that Linus Pauling says. And let me first just say, I have nothing against vitamin C. I take vitamin C every day, right?
What's an example?
Exactly. And so let's get into the novel ingredients, because you'll find this novelty actually runs all the way through the company and, frankly, the people in the company. And it does start with that delivery mechanism of buccal troche. And just to recap the delivery mechanism for people, it's a lozenge, goes in your upper lip between your cheek and gums, dissolves in about 15 to 30 minutes. And the reason why we love the buccal troche is because, one, it's close to the circulatory structure of your brain. Number two, it bypasses first pass metabolism. So if you have particular issues in digestion or liver function, we can bypass that. And number three, it can dye your tongue a certain color. But that's actually
a bonus.
A beneficial side effect, right? And so in the case of Trozy, it does dye your tongue a light lavender, but very short period of time. Now, when we get into the novel ingredients component, I think it's worth just spending a moment about how Troscriptions formulates, because we try everything on ourselves first. And I mentioned that there are 5 doctors on the team, 6 practitioners if you include myself as a healthcare practitioner as well. And what we do when we formulate is we pick, let's say, an issue that we want to solve, and the team has enough brain power where we want to tackle some really hairy issues. And that includes anything from stress to sleep to immune system function. And we're not afraid of those big, hairy issues, right? And when we take a look at that particular issue, we say, for example, who in the group has the most familiarity, air quotes, with that issue. And for example, stress and trochalm was me. And the person, so Dr. Ted, who is statistically one of the smartest people in the world, is our chief science officer. And we like to call all of our formulations because we're after an effect rather than just an ingredient. And so let's say we're unpacking sleep, and you start to look at, well, what are the common issues that people have with sleep? One is getting to bed, of course. Mine in particular is staying asleep. And then 3 is waking up refreshed, right? You don't really want to wake up feeling groggy. There are a handful of other issues, of course, and there are very specific issues with sleep that you might need a practitioner for, like sleep apnea. But in this case, when you're starting to build out your research library, Dr. Ted goes through this very, very thorough research review of all of the compounds that work on these particular issues. He breaks down, in terms of mechanisms of action. What do pharmaceuticals like Zolpidem do? What do pharmaceuticals like Zolpidem not do? And, how can we make it better? And so you break it down by mechanisms of action, and then you look at the individual receptors and you say, okay, how do we influence that receptor? And you end up with this huge laundry list of compounds that could potentially influence various receptors in the body or do various things in the body to help get the effect that we want. Now, some of those compounds, you look at the list or molecules, they end up in the category that we'll broadly call illegal. and we'll keep those ones for ourselves. But you can't put some of those things in formulas, right? And then you end up with a list of, okay, ranked by most effective. Here's the compounds that we need to go after, and that's where myself and Scott get to travel all around the world to find these compounds in various places. I've been to South Africa, and not to the places of South Africa that most people want to go to. I've been to the middle of the country hunting down very particular ingredients. We actually have a partnership with the University of the Free State in South Africa as a result of that.
Wow.
Yeah. We've been to the far-flung cities of China looking for, again, ingredients. And everything that we get is then subject to HPLC testing. So we're looking for purity and potency there. We're looking for heavy metals in the presence of those, because there's nothing that's going to screw up your Krebs cycle like a heavy metal will.
Yeah.
And then we're looking for micro. And so as long as it passes all of those tests, which is very rigorous, then it actually goes into the R&D pile. And so this is when what you called earlier alchemy really happens. But we're looking for clinically effective doses. For instance, one of the products that we're going to come out with very soon is a practitioner-only sleep formulation. It has what's become a very popular compound now called apigenin. And so apigenin is it does influence the GABA system. It also is an aromatase inhibitor, and interestingly enough, but its clinically effective dose is around 50 milligrams, depending on the person. Now, if you look outside, going back to what I said earlier, in other formulas, it could actually be a lot less. Now, coming back to Troz, when we're looking at formulating something to help with all of sleep architecture, you have to deal with onset. So how do we get somebody to fall asleep faster? And that list ended up boiling down to 3 things. I'm going to come back to one of them because you mentioned immune system function. Melatonin, which is somewhat common in sleep supplement language. We have adenosine, which is not very common to see in the sleep supplement world. And then we have cordycepin, which is a partial adenosine agonist. Now, if it's okay with you, Nat, I'll make the assumption that people are familiar with melatonin, and I can go into adenosine. So adenosine, you have various receptors in your brain for adenosine. It accumulates over the course of the day, and it actually makes you feel tired. And so what we're attempting to do is to increase that feeling of tiredness with adenosine in Troz. Adenosine has a very short half-life. It's around 15 minutes. And so we need to also get that melatonin in there to continue that sleep onset that we want. And then finally, cordycepin also is a partial adenosine agonist, so it does help you feel tired as well.
It does. Okay. I missed it.
So, yeah, one of the things about taking Trommune, by the way, as an aside, is that if you want to enhance your naps, Trommune can be a very effective one for that too.
Yeah.
So once we get done with onset, you then have the question of how do we make somebody stay asleep? And one of the beautiful things about the world we live in, Nat, is that we're always on 24/7, right? And it's one of those places where, in the supplement industry, everybody's very concerned about being on the on switch. And we have a nootropic as well, right? Don't get me wrong.
I love it. It's my
it's my go-to as well. And I take it once or twice a week. I don't take it every day. But as a company, we made a decision when Trocalm came out that we really want to focus on the off switch. And how do we get people to relax? There's at least good data in the United States that says most US citizens sleep less than 6 hours a night. Now, why is that? Well, we're either all on TikTok, hopefully not, but maybe we're doom scrolling TikTok. We're reading the news, which is never really positive. We're 24/7 available to our jobs, and we either don't exercise or exercise very limitedly. And of course, there's Netflix to accompany us to bed with very catchy shows to keep you going. And we don't relax. And so the question that we posed is, how do we get people to focus more on that off switch? Because you and I know that if we're talking about longevity, right? Like if you don't sleep, the chances of longevity for you are fairly slim. and it's not a bet that I'm willing to make. You and I both have some background in genetics and know that the DEC2 gene that everybody claims to have,
It's
which
so
allows you
rare.
which allows you to sleep less than 6 hours a night, it's really it's roughly about 3% of the population or less, and I've never actually met anybody
Well,
that's had it.
and
So
isn't it actually a negative later in life? Because I actually think that I was reading an article about a woman who had the DEC2 gene, and she was now in her 60s or 70s, and she was struggling to get 4 hours of sleep a night. And I don't know that you get a full get out of jail free card with that gene. I'm
yeah,
not convinced that you can actually, that you're not going to get the longevity benefits of sleep and not sleep at the same time. Like you can function without the sleep, and I don't know the answer to this question. Somebody could correct me on this, but I'm not sure that DEC2 gene is actually a full on, like before people start wishing they had it. I'm not sure that it's necessarily the one that you want. Maybe the FOXO4 gene, the Fox gene, the,
yeah,
and the,
and there's
no, the
people that are
clotho gene.
selling.
Sorry, the clotho
Yeah,
gene.
the cloth that my wife has that, and so she's gonna live forever, and
And be super
that's
smart.
yeah, and so the going back to deck two,
Yeah.
right? And we don't know like what the impact is on the glymphatic system, and are you able to clear out all of your brain's waste products? Because the glymphatic system is a relatively new discovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just to recap, there, the glymphatic system, when you sleep, essentially cerebral spinal fluid goes into your brain, clears out a lot of your body's waste products over the course of the day. In an ideal world, you wake up feeling refreshed,
Yeah.
and so the uh, let's get back to that off switch,
Mm-hmm.
and we can go into a little bit of neurotransmitters here. So glutamate, your body's primary excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA is your body's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. These are two neurotransmitters that actually get a lot less attention than dopamine and serotonin,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because everybody, if you look at many of the famous podcasters right now, are talking about dopamine, how to boost dopamine, how to get that reward function, etc. And that's great. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with dopamine, certainly not. Serotonin, again, similar thing. We all want to feel good, has some correlations with mood. But glutamate and GABA are where we spend a lot of our time. And so glutamate actually uh, goes through the synthesis process to become GABA. It's
Mm-hmm.
called a decarboxylase reaction. And you and I, again, going back to those genetics, right? GAD1
Yeah.
is sitting there, glutamic acid decarboxylase. Needs cofactors B6 and magnesium in order to work, and it converts into GABA. Now, the question that we sit here and try to answer is okay, first, you're working with a practitioner. Do you have enough B6 in your system? Do you have enough magnesium in your system? But for somebody who needs help now, how do we give you that help now? And that is where we built up this expertise around GABA and how it works in the body. And so with Tro-Z, you get an orthosteric ligand to the GABA receptor, meaning that it binds to the GABA A receptor, functions exactly the same as GABA, and helps release GABA in the system. Now, there's an example of that in GABA, the molecule itself, of course, right? And I know you had Scott on the podcast before. You talked about GABA and why it may not cross the blood-brain barrier. It's a huge molecule. And if you have a fully functioning gut and what's now termed leaky brain, if you don't have a leaky brain and you don't have a leaky gut, it's unlikely that GABA will have much of an effect on your brain's ability to produce gamma aminobutyric acid.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look for other orthosteric ligands of the GABA receptor, in particular the GABA A receptor, because that helps inhibit the neurotransmitter function, or it releases the inhibitory neurotransmitter. GABA B is baclofen, and that's more for muscle relaxation. So if you're looking for an orthosteric ligand of the GABA receptor, perhaps the most interesting one, or the one that has the coolest story to me, is Agarin, which is also termed Muscimol. And Agarin is from, this is an interesting story that was published in the Atlantic. And so you can go to the Atlantic article. I can probably send it to you. You can link it in the show notes, but Muscimol, or Agarin, has a history with shamans in Russia or Finland, depending on who tells you the story.
Right.
And it comes from the Amanita muscaria mushroom,
Mhm.
which also called the fly agaric mushroom. And it's the red and white spotted mushroom that most people think of when they think of Mario Kart or Alice in Wonderland, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so the story goes is that the shaman chews the fly agaric mushroom. He then pees into a cup, and his disciples drink the pee, and they see reindeer flying in the sky. And this apparently is the story of how Santa's reindeer actually started to fly. Now,
Yeah.
you're probably listening to this and like, why are we including Agarin in Trozy?
I need
Well,
to see flying reindeer. I need to go to sleep.
well, exactly. You
Yeah.
don't need, but Agarin is an orthosteric ligand of the GABA receptor. And at low doses, it has a very long half-life, between 1 and 4 hours. And at low doses is not psychoactive. And in fact, in that fly agaric mushroom, the one that's most psychoactive is ibotenic acid, and it's neurotoxic. And we actually isolated the one that's useful. And so we put 1 milligram, which is not going to cause you to have flying reindeer, into Trozy. And that's if you take the whole troche itself. Now that releases GABA in your brain and GABA neurotransmitters. The other thing that we actually just filed a patent on is around how GABA A receptor agonists relate to positive allosteric modulators. And so positive allosteric modulator, think of that as sort of even some of your benzos are actually positive allosteric modulators. They're not necessarily GABA A receptor agonists, right? And so positive allosteric modulator binds to a different receptor site, and it helps enhance the effect of GABA. So another positive allosteric modulator that you might be familiar with is kava. We have it in Trocalm, and kava is something that I've been drinking for well over a decade. My wife is from New Zealand, so Pacific Island influence, right? And so you get kava, and it helps relax you, and they used it in wars in various places to help relax you, a celebratory drink, etc. But it is just a positive allosteric modulator. And so what we've actually found is that in combining a positive allosteric modulator in Trozy, we have Hanakyle, which is derived from magnolia bark. And it's something that has been in the supplement space for a while, but that's a positive allosteric modulator of that GABA receptor. And then you combine it with muscimol, and you have this almost multiplier effect because you're getting that GABA agonist activation, and then you're getting that increased activation with the positive allosteric modulator combination. Now, what is the result of that? I know, Nat, you've taken Trozy before. And for me, one of the beautiful things about Trozy is that if you wake up in the middle of the night, and, business owners, we all have these crazy thoughts that go through our brain, right?
Yeah.
And those can keep you awake. But if you wake up in the middle of the night, it keeps your thoughts calm and allows you to get back to sleep much easier. So you have that combination, which is really a prominent point of switching on that off switch, or really turning on the off switch.
So can you maybe define positive allosteric modulator to people? Some people call them PAMs. I'm just thinking of the audience who might be sitting there going, he said those 3 crazy words.
Yeah, it's really crazy
4 or 5
words.
times. Well, positive, not so crazy. Allosteric, a little on the crazy side. Modulator, okay, so it's changing something. Can you maybe just explain what that is? Because I think what's important here is to understand like this chain of events, that the best formulated formulas have a sequence of events that they're helping to reorchestrate. And I think in a perfect world, you do this. Like you get calm before bedtime, you ease into bed, what is it? The right chemicals have come up. Your cortisol's gone down. Your adenosine's come up. Like the receptors are fully loaded. What we're trying to do here is in that hour, 45 minutes before we go to bed, we're trying to kind of set that stage for you because for whatever reason, it's not setting itself.
Absolutely. It's a great question. Thank you. Sometimes I get so passionate about this stuff that I'm like, okay, we need to go. So if you think about going back to what I said earlier about this multiplier effect of the combination of the GABA agonist and positive allosteric modulator, recap, GABA agonist is just something that can attach to the GABA receptor and help release GABA itself.
Okay.
An allosteric modulator, or in this case, a positive allosteric modulator, has a particular site on the GABA receptor, but it enhances only the production of GABA that is there. Now, why is that important to know? If you have an allosteric modulator by itself and you're not producing GABA because you're a crazy American who just sleeps less than 6 hours a night, you're completely stressed out of your mind, you're over glutamated because of TikTok or OnlyFans, or I don't know.
Or you just don't or you don't convert glutamate into GABA.
Exactly. Right. If you have a B6 deficiency, if you have a magnesium issue, and and I'm one of those people, by the way, you are not producing any GABA for which the allosteric modulator has an effect on. And so we need to give you both in order for you to have the maximum possible effect.
So this is about helping you to make more GABA and then to release it into the brain where it's needed. So
exactly.
So, whereas, and I think the other tack that a lot of people will take, and we talked about this a few minutes ago, was just, okay, well, if I need more GABA, I'm just going to take GABA, right? Like I need more GABA, and which is fine, except for the part that GABA won't get to the brain where you need it, unless if you're one of those people, and I've had a lot of people reach out to me saying, oh my God, I take GABA, I am out like a light. I'm like, that's amazing. We need to heal your GABA. And they're like, what?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great indicator as a clinician, right? So if somebody
comes test, let's just give you some GABA. If you fall flat on your face, we've got our answer.
Yeah, we don't have to test for zonulin anymore. You don't have to pay Genova or whoever you use for zonulin. Yeah. You just take your GABA supplement. I always find it funny when you get interviewed about these topics and somebody messaged me afterwards and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I get GABA and I feel fine and relaxed. I'm like, well, it tells me more about you.
Yeah. So we understand that. So the melatonin piece, I think, is very interesting as well, because melatonin is, it shouldn't be a controversial compound. It is so important.
It's a hormone that our bodies naturally produce.
It's a hormone naturally produced. We make less of it as we age. It's not just about sleep. It's about a powerful antioxidant. It's got some really, really powerful impact. Now, in the context of what we're talking about today, you're providing such a tiny amount that it's fire starter, if anything. It's, we're not going to get into the world of the people who advocate taking 50 milligrams of melatonin every morning. Like, we're not going to go, that's just a whole other extreme world. We're not going to touch.
Big can of worms.
Big old can of worms. But in terms of this conversation, there's the tiniest amount of melatonin in that supplement that really is there to initiate a process. And I think that if you start to really envision what's happening here as a chain of events, we start to understand why we don't need a lot of that one thing, because all we're doing is setting the stage for the positive allosteric modulator and the GABA release. But we're kind of setting the stage for that to happen, which will kind of take it away. You're not relying on a 2x4 to hit you over the head kind of thing. Like
exactly.
One thing.
That's very well said. And I think there's a couple points I'll make about melatonin, but also what you said was so beautiful that I just want to reiterate it, is this is put together deliberately to help initiate a sequence, right? And you can look at each ingredient. And so onset, melatonin, we know helps with sleep onset. Adenosine certainly helps make you feel tired. So how do we get you tired going into bed? We also have cordycepin there as a partial adenosine agonist. Cordycepin also plays a role in improving deep sleep. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about cordycepin here in a second. And so it improves that, the first couple of stages that you go into in sleep. You also have your GABA plus positive allosteric modulator in muscimol and honokiol. And then you also have a couple of cannabinoids, which contribute to the improvement of GABA production through the endocannabinoid system, CBD and CBN. CBN is one of those that comes, I really love it because there's a lot of stories in the N of 1 community about how it extends sleep duration. And that I found myself. Now, are we a few years away from a paper on that? I think so.
Yeah.
But you also have 5-HTP in there. 5-HTP leading to the production of serotonin, helping you stay asleep. That sleep architecture, but also downstream affect the production of melatonin, helping you with that sleep onset again. And then you wake up refreshed the next day and ready to rock. And that's the idea. And what actually helps wake you up refreshed and not grabbing at your phone right away is that agarine that we talked about from Santa's reindeer.
Nice. Gotta have those mushrooms in there.
But let's, if it's okay, Nat, I want to talk about melatonin because you mentioned this, and I think there's something that we at Troscriptions espouse to, in the sense that not every one of our formulas is going to work for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a decent sized population of people who have a paradoxical effect with melatonin, meaning that it keeps them actually awake. The same is actually true in TroCalm 2, which is another one of our stress or anti-anxiousness formulas, where if you have a sufficient amount or even an over sufficient amount of vitamin B3 or niacin, it may actually cause you to stay awake. And so being aware that, these formulas may not work for everyone, we're happy to admit that. And this is not really a silver bullet. It is a silver bullet for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
but there are particular ingredients in each formula that may have some paradoxical effect and may not work for you.
Yeah. And melatonin is one of them. So you probably know, if like, basically bottom line, if you're a person, I mean, would it be fair to say that for people that melatonin just keeps them up, this is probably not the formula that's going to hit the mark for them? Or do you think that the other elements are enough to overcome the small amount of melatonin that's in there?
Well,
Do you have insight into that? Or
it's always very hard to make a precise answer on that.
Yeah.
What I would say is we have two formulas right now which take advantage of that GABA plus positive allosteric modulator technology. And I can give an example of the woman that I sleep next to every night. She takes TroCalm. And because TroCalm actually helps ease her mind, we almost called it TroZen as sort of an insider information there, because it
That'd be a
helps
great name for
ease
it.
your mind and it helps you relax, less thoughts going into bed. And that works very well for her. Now, she also doesn't take Tro-Z because for her, it's not as effective as TroCalm. So again, there's an example there of different strokes for different folks.
Mm-hmm.
Both can be very effective. And in fact, we do have people that use TroCalm throughout the day, maybe in sort of quartered doses throughout the day to help combat what might be more general stress, general anxiety. And then they transition in the evening to something that really causes them to fall asleep, like a Tro-Z. Again, it is more what is driving you not sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the thoughts running through your head rather than you feeling tired? Is it that you don't feel tired? Is it that you're waking up in the middle of the night because you have a business and you know that you want that business to grow beyond where it is currently, and as a result you're up in the middle of the night thinking of ideas? Tro-Z attempts to address all aspects of sleep architecture, but in certain cases maybe TroCalm is your better solution.
Mm-hmm. Or the stack. We talked about this before the podcast, like for some people it's going to be using TroCalm during the day and then
Absolutely.
letting that Tro-Z. But one thing I also want to point out is, this isn't a sleeping pill. I have a girlfriend who uses sleeping pills for sleep, which makes me shudder because I just think of her sleep architecture, and maybe we can define sleep architecture.
What it does to REM. Yeah.
Because I get sleeping pills for someone who's been through a crazy shock and hasn't slept in days or whatever the case may be. You need to break that cycle. And there is definitely a use case scenario where they will save someone's life. But when they get used as the only way for someone to sleep, there's a trade-off. There's a real sacrifice there. And maybe you want to speak to it a little bit, because you get knocked out, but the sleep architecture, that those moving through those different stages of sleep that your brain needs to recover and restore itself for the next day, get sacrificed. And from, if we're going to talk about longevity, moving through those sleep stages is a critical piece of the puzzle when it comes to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And this begs a deeper discussion on biological rhythms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have essentially 90-minute intervals or sleep cycles throughout the night that you go through. And the typical person in an ideal world, would go through deep sleep first and then eventually work their way through REM sleep, which is the last couple of stages. Now, not everybody is the same. Not everybody's ideal. And if you have something like shift work or, my favorite thing used to be jet lag, it can
Oh, yeah.
screw up sleep architecture. Now,
Disaster.
let's talk about just sort of, we know a lot of the disorders that come from circadian rhythm dysregulation, right? These can include anything from cardiovascular disease to even just, jet lag, which is probably the one that everybody thinks about the most, right? And it can also lead to, misprinting of cells or cancer, et cetera. And so biological rhythms or chronobiology is a fascinating topic, and I've spent a lot of my life studying it. The first couple of stages of sleep, we get a lot of immune system repair, but also hormonal increase. So you get things like growth hormone production in deep sleep. The last couple of stages of sleep, where we talk about REM or rapid eye movement sleep, you have certainly a lot of dreams. And memory consolidation appears to happen across all stages, but certainly there as well. Sleep is one of those fascinating things where if you actually hear somebody like Matt Walker talk about it, or somebody I'm close to, Dr. Benjamin Smar or Greg Potter even, we know more than we did yesterday, but there's still a lot that we don't know. And so having that beautiful sleep architecture that you can monitor with your Oura Ring is certainly important, almost more important than those stages being optimized, as the biohacking world likes to optimize particular stages, right? And each of them have their purpose, and it appears that having the architecture right will be better for longevity as of what we know right now.
Yeah. And just that, just going back to, I'm not telling people I'm not saying throw away your sleeping pills if that's the only way you're getting to sleep, but I would encourage you to find a practitioner and do the work to figure out, what is it in your mechanism that needs the support that, you're just having to go to the sledgehammer instead of.
Yeah. It's thank you for bringing that back up, because I missed the most important part there, which is talking about the sleeping pills, right?
Right.
And look, I've used them for long flights before, and occasionally will still use them on like a PRN or just ad hoc basis, right? But you have to acknowledge one thing, is that over time, some of these sleeping pills will not keep that architecture whole. In fact, you might see certain stages start to evaporate. And as a result of that, you may want to look at working with that practitioner to understand, what is the source of that insomnia? There's a few free surveys out there, like the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. If you don't have a wearable, you can get one. And those are all ways for you to kind of start to do this self-discovery. But when it comes to areas like insomnia, it's definitely important to work with a practitioner to understand the why behind why you're not sleeping. Are there certain medications, like trazodone comes up a lot, and are those affecting your sleep too? To your point, what you said earlier, for the people that are insomniacs, like maybe that's what you need for now, but at the same time, over the long run, you want to be working on those behaviors that help you come off of those medications.
For sure. And even hormones, right? Even hormone balance is going to have a massive impact. Okay. So you mentioned cordycepin, and, I actually completely forgot that cordycepin was part of the Trozy formula, because I now think of cordycepin as purely an immune thing, the troimmune. And so, when we were talking about planning this episode, we said, okay, we're going to talk about sleep, because if we have good sleep, then sleep is all about immunity. I mean, it's all about everything else, but the immune system really depends on sleep to function well. But there's no doubt that immune support is one of those things that is becoming maybe a little more important in the world that we're evolving in. Like, our bodies are being assaulted by so many different angles in so many different ways that I'm getting to the point where I'm like, maybe we just need to give it some love. We just need to give it a little bit of help. And so cordycepin's interesting because it's an extract. It's a specific ingredient from the cordyceps mushroom, which of course has become very, very famous because of was it a Netflix series? Is it
The Last of Us? Yeah.
I remember
shout out to Pedro Pascal, right?
Yeah. So I knew nothing about The Last of Us. My husband turns on the TV And I'm watching this, and I start to figure out the gist of it, and I'm like, oh my God, that's cordyceps mushrooms. That's what cordyceps does to ants. And he's looking at me like I'm completely insane. Like, no, you don't understand. It's this mushroom, and it takes over the brain of the ants, and then it grows out of their heads, and then it makes them do what it wants so that it can survive at the expense of the ants. That show, to me, it was almost like a little bit too close to what could possibly happen in real life. It really gave me the willies. It was a good show.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic show, right? And I'm hoping that they come out with season 2 at some point. But it seems like Pedro Pascal is a very, very busy man these days, right?
Oh, is it being difficult?
So let's talk about it, because in many ways that show made the discussion around cordycepin to be a little bit more difficult. And let me start with just saying we had no intentions at the beginning of, or the end of last year, of releasing an immune system product, because when we were going through the production of Troz, we had cordycepin already. We knew it helped for deep sleep, and we knew it was a partial adenosine agonist. But sometimes when you're doing research on these compounds that aren't really well known or mostly used within popular culture, you discover some interesting things. And I distinctly remember this night where it was pretty late at night, and Ted all of a sudden sends me like a barrage of messages just saying like, hey, we have to do this because of this, this, and this, right? And I'm reading it and getting excited. And of course, what do? You torture sleep because you're reading something exciting right before bed. But cordycepin, as you rightfully highlighted, is one of the primary alkaloids of the Cordyceps militaris mushroom. And cordycepin itself makes up about 300 to 500 micrograms per gram of cordyceps mushroom.
That's a lot.
That's 300 to 400 micrograms per gram. So it's actually like 0.03% of the actual mushroom itself. But it has some amazing and beautiful properties, right? And I'm a person who's been taking cordyceps mushrooms for a very long time. I have some friends in Finland that grow them. And, I was taking it for energy and all this stuff. And now we've isolated this alkaloid and we're starting to use it for deep sleep. And they're looking at me like we're crazy. But there's a lot of really good studies on this, some of which are in mice and some of which are in humans. And there are some clinical trials around cordycepin itself being used in the anti-cancer field. But why did we decide to isolate cordycepin for an immune system product? Because sometimes you just get those ingredients and you're like, wow, this is so cool. It was a little bit like when we released Just Blue. We're like, okay, we have methylene blue. We need to release Just Blue, because people wanted pure methylene blue. Now, we almost did this for ourselves, because why is cordycepin very cool? Let's recap what we already discussed. It's a partial adenosine agonist, so it's going to help you feel tired. It helps with deep sleep, but it's also an anti-inflammatory, in the sense that it will help with neuroinflammation. It inhibits the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF alpha, IL-1B, IL-6, and a few others. It is an immune system modulator in the sense that will help modulate mast cell in the body. So you might be able to use cordycepin for allergies. Now, and so the other thing is looking at what it does in the regulation of immune cells. And so we released Trommune as a result of this, and it was actually pretty wild to see the fanfare. We're currently out of stock for it. And one of the plans with Trommune is to actually introduce both a practitioner-only line and a much higher dose, so 150 milligram dose, which is actually what we initially launched, but we'll move that to practitioner-only. And then we'll release a lower dose for people that are looking for the sleep benefits. They're looking for the partial adenosine agonist itself, so helping you feel tired, but also that immune system modulator function. So how do we get people to either have that anti-inflammatory function, or maybe my wife takes it for allergies, for example. So maybe it'll help with their mast cell function. And so that will prevent, for example, the release of histamine, et cetera. And again, Trommune coming out in a consumer-only version in 75 milligram doses very, very soon.
I love it. Actually, the first time I read up on cordyceps was when my husband was going to Machu Picchu, and I was looking for ways to help him to deal with higher altitude. And apparently, cordyceps helps with the body to adapt to lower oxygen environments. Like it is amazing how these compounds are so multifactorial. Like they bring so much to
Hmm.
the party. So, but on the immune front, like it's really interesting to me that as we're talking about Tromune, we're still talking about sleep.
Hmm.
We're still talking about supporting sleep, and I didn't actually expect this out of this conversation, which really cements that relationship between sleep and immunity. It
Oh,
is
of
it
course.
is
Yeah.
it is it is one of the most fundamental truths in our, like if you're sleep deprived, you are more likely to get sick or to catch whatever the next bug is that's flying around. And and then of course we know on the metabolic side, like becoming more insulin resistant, becoming pre-diabetic the next day, whatever the case may be. So with the Tromune though, so how are people using it? Are they using it just as a daily, or you said your wife uses it for her allergies? Is she using it
Yeah.
seasonally to support her allergies, or might someone just use it as part of a sleep stack so that they're supporting sleep and their immune system? Like,
Hmm.
what's your?
Well, I mean, again, different strokes for different folks, right? And so there are a number of different use cases. And we've been working with a clinic out in New York who's been giving it out to their patients, and they're taking it nightly. And what it does is it helps with immune system regulation, helps them sleep better. And as a result, they wake up in the morning and they actually see an improvement in mood of all
Mm,
things, which is a pretty incredible thing for this clinic. Now, the other way that you can see people doing this is people, for example, seasonally. Allergies is certainly a case where you could use this, and
mhm.
it has been. We've had reported instances of this working seasonally. You can use it for when you're getting sick. You can use it for uh, as an anti-inflammatory. There's some studies around cordycepin being used for traumatic brain injury, for example. It's a powerful antioxidant, right?
Yeah.
And so it's something that you can use for a variety of things, whether it be that antioxidant, anti-inflammatory that we talked about. I certainly take it almost every day at this point to kind of modulate some of those things, but also because I just don't want to be sick.
Yeah.
And some of that seasonal function around those allergies for people that do have those, it can be helpful there. At least it appears, according to what it does to mast cells.
Yeah. No, I mean, the mast cell discussion is really interesting. And so are you finding for mast cells in the cases that you've looked at, are you finding that it's, because I know that with all the other trochees, some people get effect in as little as a quarter trochee, other people need a half, then you get people who need
Yeah.
more. Are you seeing that same thing here?
So
Because you've and we talked about cordycepin. What else is it? It can't just be cordycepin.
no, it's all cordycepin. So
Is it
Troimmune is
all
all
cordycepin?
cordycepin, and remember, sometimes we have these hero molecules that
Mm,
arise, and we're
it's
like,
just
okay,
enough
this
to, yeah,
it's enough to do the job by itself. For example, methylene blue has so many different properties that make it interesting as a molecule itself, from spatial to non-spatial memory to energy to antiviral, antifungal, etc. Makes it a very interesting molecule in itself. Here, you're having something that's a partial adenosine agonist, and so it
mhm,
will help you feel tired if you need that. It can help with inflammatory cytokine regulation. So if you have somebody who does have inflammation, you can have that as well. You have the antioxidant properties, which go hand in hand with that inflammatory side. And then what we just discussed about mast cell disintegration is uh, they're all properties of cordycepin. And so we wanted to release that so people have it. In
yeah,
general, what you find with Troscriptions, the reason why it's a trochee, by the way, and if you look at any one of our trochees, it's quartered.
yeah.
And
I
the
missed that
trochees are,
first. You know my story
yeah,
about glucanatine, right?
You have to tell me because I
So
think
when
it's
I
worth
first got
everybody hearing.
recanatine, I would take a whole troche and stick it up into my cheek and go to the CrossFit gym and blow.
That's way too much for me, and I'm much bigger than you, so
Yeah,
it's just
it was. They were looking for they would see me coming and they'd be like, okay, show me your tongue net, and they'd be like, oh yeah, it's going to be one of those days. So it took me forever to finally talk to Scott, and he's like, actually no, there's a score on that troche. You're supposed to cut it up. I was like, oh, okay. Which was also great because it lasts a lot longer that way. It was a fun
absolutely.
ride.
And I'm sure I've only tried one hole one time in my life, and I was like, okay, that's a little too much for me. My dose of blue cannatine is a half.
Yeah.
But going back to the reason why the trochees are scored is because basic principles. We have 5 physicians on the team. We have healthcare practitioners as well, and what we do is we want to make sure that your dose is the right dose for you. And
Mm-hmm.
that requires something called titration. And so each of the trochees is scored into 4 so that you can cut it into 1/4 and try if that particular dose works for you. The typical way we start people, even on Tromune, and Tromune, by the way, is our best tasting troche. It tastes like green apple.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you cut it in half and try a half. Now, with Tromune, because of what I said earlier about partial adenosine agonists, sleep, etc., you probably want to take it at night. It's also immune system function. But we do have people like I know Ben Greenfield, for instance, takes it before he goes for a nap, right? And it helps actually with that onset of sleep as well. So you can use it in a variety of different ways, but we typically want to start people at a half, and then maybe you either go up or down based on what you feel. The thing about immune system function, though, is that you might be able to monitor something like deep sleep because cordycepin does increase deep sleep, but it's more like an insurance plan in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that you'll generally notice, like this year, I didn't get sick throughout winter, which is pretty incredible considering I moved countries. You generally notice it when things don't happen to you. I
Right.
didn't get sick. I woke up feeling refreshed. I didn't get the cold that my wife got, etc. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the beauties, but also downsides of even purchasing something like insurance, right? And
Yeah.
you have to have it,
Yeah.
but it's something that you don't necessarily see the benefits of, or you don't feel it necessarily right away. In
Yeah.
certain
It's not like
cases, you
getting a
will.
shiny new toy and getting to look at you.
Yeah,
It's more like you just don't get the bad.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like you don't get the bad, and you don't necessarily get the jolt that you get with blue cannatine, or you do the numbness that you get with Trocalm, or the ability to feel asleep. I mean, you might actually get a sensorial cue in the sense that you might feel tired,
Mm-hmm.
but that is the cordycepin working itself.
Yeah. Okay. I love it. Okay. So, all right. Well, we've talked about immunity. Now, one thing is this episode's dropping end of July. I know that cordycepin being a bit of an exotic compound,
Oh
there have been
man, yeah,
some supply chain issues, but I think they're resolving, right? So, are you
of course. Yeah.
we
So
find it
what you'll see from
around?
us, you'll see for cordycepin might actually be back in stock at the end of July, if not early August.
Okay.
By cordycepin, I mean Tromune, of course.
Of
That
course.
will be the direct to consumer version. So that 75 milligram one. For the practitioners listening here, you'll see a practitioner only version coming out probably end of August, early September.
Okay. Super. Which is basically the same thing, just double dose.
Double dose. And again, there's certain conversations that you can have with practitioners that you can't have with the general public. And so we do have a robust, and we'll be building a robust practitioner only line going forward.
Love it. Okay, Boomer. Last thing I just want to touch on this very briefly because we've been at it for a while here. There is another one of the pieces of your company of Troscriptions that makes it quite unique is the not-for-profit arm. And, again, it speaks to the ethos of the company to shape practitioners, to help bring knowledge to whether they're medical doctors or practitioners in that really unique way of approaching problems that you guys have and that Dr. Ted has. And so you've taken it upon yourself to basically create a school to help to educate. And people will often ask me, Nat, I want to do this. Where should I go? And I'm like, well, that would be a really good place to start. So maybe you want to talk about that very briefly
Of
before we
course.
jump off.
Yeah, of course. So we can talk about it in the context of objectives, but the in 2017 we launched two companies at the same time, which is insane, by the way, because the 5-year survival rate of a startup is about 50%, and when you launch two at the same time, it doesn't actually increase.
Yeah, probably
And so
goes
we launched
down.
yeah, we launched a nonprofit and a for-profit at the same time. And it's something called the reciprocity model, and it's an old business model, but it hasn't been used very often lately. And we launched the nonprofit to essentially educate doctors and healthcare practitioners, so non-doctor professionals, on how to optimize for health rather than treat disease. We do that predominantly by teaching nutrient and hormone balancing, and we have online cohorts where people can join, soon to be 20 of their best friends. We actually cap the class size to learn topics like clinical metabolomics, chronobiology, which we talked a lot about today, bioenergetics, exposomics. We even have a module on cannabis. We have a module on epigenetics and a few other things. And Home Hope is really the anchor by which we serve the world, right? Because a practitioner will see several hundred people. Now, nutrient and hormone balancing, for people that don't know about that, that takes 6 to 9 months in the most diligent of patients, in the most diligent of them. And they need to fill that gap, because if you have a patient that comes to you and says, I'm stressed now, I can't sleep now, or I have inflammation, you need to be able to give them something. And that's actually why we started Troscriptions. And so the Troscriptions product line serves the health optimization practitioner. And the health optimization practitioner has a product line that they can trust, because we talked a lot about testing earlier, the rigor that we go through in order to do that, to get the most effective products, is a very expensive endeavor, but it also is meant for these practitioners, so they have a product line that they can rely upon. So they feed back and forth on each other. And again, that's something called the reciprocity model. Just to kind of give you an overall of the objectives of what we're trying to accomplish. If you look at healthcare globally right now, and this also is true in Europe, which is where I lived for 7 years, and a lot of people speak positively about Europe's healthcare system, but it does need some work. What we're actually trying to do is establish a specialty within the healthcare system that actually focuses on health rather than disease management. And if we accomplish that objective, good. Checkbox 1, that's great. Checkbox number 2 for me would be if Troscriptions is able to establish this in-between land between supplement company and pharmaceutical company, that analytical rigor of that pharmaceutical company, but we use the dietary supplement industry to allow us to come to market faster. And the success there would be the rising tide raises all boats, right? If we start seeing other supplement companies go with that analytical rigor, then checkbox number 2. Then checkbox number 3 is the parent company Smarter Not Harder, where we're working a lot with artificial intelligence right now to design and help the practitioner of the future. So there's a lot of things coming out of that holding company very soon. And even Troscriptions will be releasing some very new products soon. And we look forward to talking with you about them in the very near future.
I'm looking forward to that very much. So, Boomer, thank you so much. This has been a deep dive. So, folks, listeners, I hope you got some gems out of this one. I think there was a lot there for sleep and immunity and all the things that we know we need to take care of. If you are, I think that's it. I think, Boomer, why don't you tell people where they can find you? Actually,
yeah,
that's how it goes an episode.
My life is basically through Troscriptions and the nonprofit. So you can find more about the nonprofit, and if you want to become a practitioner, that's at homehope.org.
Yeah.
And then Troscriptions is troscriptions.com. If you plug either one of those into your social medias, you'll find out a lot more about us. And there you can probably reach me direct by just sending us a DM or something like that.
Amazing. And if folks, if you're going to decide that you're going to give some of these amazing products a try, you can use code NAT10 for our listeners. That so give you a little bit of a leg up and get some of those troches in your hands. I think they're
beautiful.
Pretty soon you're going to have like a multi-pack. It's going to be like a rainbow.
So we have the 4-pack available for everybody, but as the product line grows, I don't know how we can keep growing out the packaging, but we'll make it
We'll
happen,
figure it out.
and we'll figure out a way to get it to you in Canada too soon.
And every time I'm in the States, I'm stocking up. So anyway,
Awesome.
thank you so much. This has been great.
No, thank you for your support, Nat. Thank you.